Welcome, my friends, to a tale of love, deception, and the unbreakable bond between two childhood friends. Enjoy the story! Rachel stormed into her penthouse apartment, her eyes flashing with anger as she slammed the door behind her. Paul, her childhood friend and constant protector, followed close behind, his face etched with concern. "I can't believe you, Paul!" Rachel shouted, whirling around to face him. "How dare you question my relationship with Kevin? He's a good man, and I love him." Paul sighed, running a hand through his tousled hair. "Rachel, please, just hear me out. There's something off about Kevin, something insincere. I don't trust him." Rachel scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer. "Oh, so now you're an expert on relationships? Last I checked, you were still single and pining after that barista at the coffee shop." Paul flinched, hurt flashing across his face. "That's not fair, Rachel. I'm just trying to look out for you. You barely know this guy, and you're already talking about marriage?" Rachel's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "I don't need you to look out for me, Paul. I'm a grown woman, and I can make my own decisions. Maybe instead of worrying about my love life, you should focus on finding a bride for yourself." Paul's jaw clenched, his eyes hardening with determination. "Fine. If that's how you feel, then I will. I'll find someone who appreciates me, someone who doesn't take me for granted like you do." With that, he turned on his heel and stalked out of the apartment, leaving Rachel standing alone in the middle of the room, her heart racing with a confusing mix of anger and regret. Rachel stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down the sleek red evening gown that clung to her curves like a second skin. She had spent hours at the boutique, trying on dress after dress, determined to find the perfect one for her engagement party. She wanted to impress Kevin's mother, Anna, who had just arrived in town for the celebration. Rachel knew how much Kevin adored his mother, and she was determined to win her approval. As she studied her reflection, her mind drifted back to the day she had first met Kevin. She had been at her favorite parkour training ground, practicing her jumps and flips, when she had accidentally knocked into him, sending them both tumbling to the ground. At first she had been annoyed, ready to give him a piece of her mind for getting in her way. But then he had looked up at her with those piercing blue eyes, a dazzling smile on his face, and all her anger had melted away. "Wow," he had said, his voice filled with admiration. "I've never seen anyone move like that before. You're incredible." Rachel had felt a flush of pride, and something else, something warm and fluttery in the pit of her stomach. From that moment on, she had been hopelessly smitten, drawn to Kevin's charm and charisma like a moth to a flame. Now, as she stood in front of the mirror, the diamond on her finger sparkling in the light, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. Was Paul right? Was she rushing into things with Kevin? She shook her head, pushing the thought away. No, she loved Kevin, and he loved her. That was all that mattered. With a final glance at her reflection, Rachel grabbed her clutch and headed out the door, ready to face the world with her head held high. Rachel sat at a corner table in the cafe, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee as she watched the world go by. She had come to the shopping center to clear her head, to try and shake off the nagging feeling of unease that had been plaguing her all day. As she took a sip of her latte, her eyes widened in shock. There, across the room, was Paul, sitting at a table with a gorgeous young woman, their heads bent close together as they laughed and chatted. Rachel felt a sharp pang of jealousy and hurt slice through her heart. How could Paul move on so quickly, so easily? Just yesterday, he had been declaring his undying loyalty to her, and now here he was, flirting with some random girl like she didn't even exist. She pushed back from the table, her coffee forgotten as she grabbed her purse and rushed out of the cafe, hot tears stinging the corners of her eyes. When she got home, the house was quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Rachel moved through the rooms like a ghost, her mind numb with shock and betrayal. As she passed by the kitchen, she heard the murmur of voices coming from inside. Curious, she pressed her ear to the door, straining to make out the words. "Can't believe how easy it was," Kevin was saying, his voice filled with smug satisfaction. "Rachel's completely clueless. She has no idea we're just using her for her money." "Of course she doesn't," Anna replied, her tone dripping with disdain. She's just a naive little rich girl, desperate for love and attention. Once you get her to sign over her wealth to us, we'll be set for life. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face, her heart pounding in her chest as the truth slammed into her like a freight train. Kevin and Anna were con artists, just like Paul had warned her. They had never loved her, never cared about her at all. She stumbled backwards, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to tear from her throat. She had to get out of there, had to escape before they realized she had overheard their cruel plot. Quietly, she slipped out the back door, her mind reeling with shock and betrayal as she ran blindly into the night. Rachel climbed over the fence of the parkour training ground, her heart pounding in her chest as she landed on the other side. She had come here on instinct, drawn to the one place where she had always felt strong, in control. But now, as she stood in the middle of the empty lot, the silence pressing in on her from all sides, she felt anything but strong. She felt broken, shattered, like a fragile piece of glass that had been dropped on the hard concrete. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as she tried to center herself. She had always loved parkour, loved the rush of adrenaline that came with pushing her body to its limits, with defying gravity and fear. But now, as she stared up at the towering wall in front of her, the one she had always dreamed of conquering, she felt a flicker of doubt. Could she really do this, in her current state of mind? Was it worth the risk? Before she could talk herself out of it, Rachel took off running, her feet pounding against the pavement as she built up speed. She leaped onto the wall, her fingers scrabbling for purchase on the rough brick as she hauled herself up, higher and higher. She was almost to the top when she heard a shout from below, a familiar voice calling her name. It was Paul, his face pale with fear as he raced towards her, his arms outstretched as if to catch her. But it was too late. Rachel's foot slipped, her balance faltering as she tumbled backwards, a scream tearing from her throat as she plummeted towards the ground. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was Paul's face, his eyes wide with horror as he watched her fall. Rachel woke to the steady beep of machines, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling her nostrils. She blinked, her vision blurry as she tried to focus on her surroundings. She was in a hospital room, the walls a dull, lifeless beige. And there, sitting by her bedside, was Kevin, his face a mask of concern as he leaned forward to take her hand. "Rachel, thank God you're awake," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so worried about you. What were you thinking going to that Parker place alone?" Rachel stared at him, her mind reeling with confusion and betrayal. How could he sit there, pretending to care about her when just hours ago he had been plotting to steal her fortune? Before she could respond, Anna appeared in the doorway, her face pinched with disapproval. "Rachel, darling, you gave us quite a scare," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But don't you worry. Kevin's going to take care of everything. He just needs you to sign a few papers, giving him power of attorney over your business while you recover." Rachel's eyes widened, panic rising in her throat as she realized what they were trying to do. They wanted her to sign over control of her company, to hand them the keys to her entire life on a silver platter. She shook her head, her voice trembling as she spoke. "No, I won't do it. I know what you're up to, Kevin. I heard you and your mother talking, heard your whole scheme to trick me out of my money." Kevin's face twisted with anger, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "You don't know what you're talking about, Rachel. You're confused, still groggy from the anesthesia. Just sign the papers and everything will be fine." But Rachel wasn't backing down. She yanked her hand out of his grip, her voice rising with fury. "I won't sign anything, Kevin. I know exactly what you are, and I won't let you take advantage of me anymore." Anna's face darkened, her lips curling into a sneer. "You ungrateful little brat. After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By throwing our love back in our faces?" Rachel laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Love? You don't know the meaning of the word. You're nothing but a pair of con artists, and I won't let you get away with this." Kevin's face twisted with rage, his hand rising as if to strike Rachel. But before he could make contact, the door burst open, and 2 police officers rushed into the room, their guns drawn. "Kevin Miller, Anna Miller, you're under arrest for attempted fraud and assault," one of the officers said, his voice stern as he pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Kevin and Anna gaped at the officers, their faces slack with shock and disbelief. "What? This is a mistake!" Anna shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "We've done nothing wrong!" But the officers weren't listening. They cuffed Kevin and Anna, reading them their rights as they led them out of the room, their protests fading into the distance. Rachel watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a familiar figure step into the room. It was Paul, his face grim as he walked over to her bedside, his hand reaching out to take hers. "Rachel, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but I had to be sure. Had to gather enough evidence to prove that Kevin and Anna were up to no good." Rachel stared at him, her mind reeling with confusion. "What are you talking about, Paul? What evidence?" Paul sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The woman you saw me with at the cafe? That was my cousin Sarah. She's a private investigator, and she's been helping me look into Kevin's background." He pulled out a folder, handing it to Rachel with a grim expression. "We found out that Kevin and Anna have a history of scamming wealthy women, of tricking them into signing over their fortunes, and then disappearing without a trace." Rachel's hands shook as she flipped through the pages, her eyes widening with each damning piece of evidence. Bank statements, police reports, even a mugshot of Kevin from a previous arrest. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you just tell me? Why go through all this trouble?" Paul's face softened, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Because I knew you wouldn't believe me, Rachel. You were too blinded by your feelings for Kevin to see the truth. I had to let it play out, had to let you see for yourself what kind of man he really was." Rachel felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, a lump rising in her throat. "I'm so sorry, Paul. You were right all along, and I was too stubborn to listen. Can you ever forgive me?" Paul smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "There's nothing to forgive, Rachel. You're my best friend, and I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Rachel lay back against the pillows, her mind still foggy from the pain medication. She looked over at Paul, who was sitting by her bedside, his face etched with concern. "I still can't believe it," she murmured, her voice slurring slightly. "Kevin and Anna, con artists. How could I have been so stupid?" Paul shook his head, his hand tightening around hers. "You're not stupid, Rachel. You're one of the smartest, most capable women I know. They took advantage of your kind heart, your desire to see the best in people." Rachel sighed, a wry smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Well, I guess I learned my lesson the hard way. From now on, I'm going to be a lot more careful about who I let into my life." She looked over at Paul, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Speaking of which, what exactly did I say while I was under the influence of all those drugs? I have a vague memory of something about you being my knight in shining armor." Paul grinned, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Oh, you said a lot of things, Rachel. Something about how you've always been in love with me, how you can't imagine your life without me." Rachel's face flushed, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I did not say that! You're making it up!" Paul laughed, holding up his hands in surrender. Okay, maybe I embellished a little. But you did say that I was the best friend you've ever had, and that you don't know what you'd do without me." Rachel smiled, her heart swelling with warmth and affection. "Well, that part's true at least. You really are the best friend I could ever ask for, Paul. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." Paul's face grew serious, his eyes locking with hers. "Rachel, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been wanting to say for a long time." Rachel's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is it, Paul?" Paul took a deep breath, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out to cup her face. "I love you, Rachel. I've loved you since we were kids, playing in the sandbox together. I've loved you through every up and down, every triumph and heartbreak. And I know I'm not perfect, know I've made my share of mistakes. But if you'll have me, I promise to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you deserve to be." Rachel felt tears spill down her cheeks, a smile breaking across her face like the dawn. "Oh, Paul, I love you too. I think I always have, even if I was too stubborn to admit it. You're the only man I've ever truly trusted. the only one who's always been there for me no matter what." She reached out, pulling him close until their foreheads touched, their breath mingling in the space between them. "Yes, Paul. Yes, I'll marry you. I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else." Paul's face lit up with joy, his lips crashing down on hers in a kiss that stole her breath away. And as they held each other close, their hearts beating as one, Rachel knew that she had finally found her happily ever after. 1 year later, Rachel stood at the front of her favorite seafood restaurant, a glass of champagne in her hand as she looked out over the crowd of smiling faces. It was the grand opening of her newest location, the culmination of months of hard work and dedication. But more than that, it was a celebration of the love and friendship that had brought her to this moment. Paul stood by her side, his arm wrapped around her waist as he gazed down at her with adoration. They had been married for 6 months now, and every day was a new adventure, a new chance to fall in love all over again. As Rachel raised her glass, her voice ringing out clear and strong, she felt a sense of peace wash over her, a feeling of rightness and belonging that she had never known before. "To new beginnings," she said, her eyes shining with happiness, "to second chances, and to the love that guides us through even the darkest of times. May we always remember the lessons we've learned, and cherish the blessings we've been given." The crowd erupted in applause, their voices joining together in a chorus of joy and celebration. And as Rachel looked out over the sea of faces, she knew that she had finally found her place in the world. She had faced betrayal and heartbreak, had been tested in ways she never could have imagined. But through it all, she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more deeply in love than ever before. And as she turned to Paul, her husband and her best friend, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, hand in hand and heart to heart.